Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 27 of Weekend Warriors, the review series for the sports cars of GranTurismo, and that could include convertibles, coupes, big luxury sports cars, or small, lightweight ones. Now you're probably wondering why this car is here. Because said vehicle, the Nismo GT-R LM road-going version, isn't necessarily a car which you would immediately categorise as a sports car. It's kind of a weird car to categorise, in fact, because technically it's based on an import. It has the marketing, the rarity and the looks of more of a super sport or supercar, but then it has the spec and the performance of a sports car. So it's a very difficult car to actually peg down in one specific category. Now, technically speaking, it's a homologation vehicle. It's a road-going car which was made as a requirement to allow Nissan to enter a Skyline, in particular an R33 Skyline, into the GT1 category at the Le Mans. That was the purpose of this car. They only built one road-going version, that is, and the racing version of the GT1 Skyline actually did really well. It finished really high in its class, only being beaten by the McLaren F1. That's pretty impressive. And I personally would love to see that GT1 race car return to GranTurismo, because I believe, if I remember correctly, you used to be able to turn this car into the GT1 version back on GranTurismo 2. Yet another reason why GranTurismo 2 was such a good game. Now, the problem with having such an amazing GT1 racing version is that that sets a lot of weight on the road car to also be good. And 9 times out of 10 on GranTurismo, this is the car that we've had to work with rather than the racing version. It's not a choice between the two, you just don't have the option. This is the only version which we get the chance to use. And although it is based, as I already mentioned, on an R33 Skyline GT-R, it's actually about as far away from that Skyline as you can get. For a start, it's not even all-wheel drive, it's a rear-wheel drive car due to, of course, racing regulations. But that isn't the only difference. Of course, you've got the visuals, which are totally different. The fact that it's a one-off instead of a mass production vehicle. It's significantly more expensive than the road-going Skylines at $500,000 credits. And even though it does share, as you'd expect, a 2.6 litre turbo engine with the road-going GT-Rs, the fully tuned spec in particular is actually not as impressive. And that's a real shame, because the biggest downside of this LM road car, not just on GT6, but I believe, if I remember correctly, on other GranTurismo games as well, is that it's not as fast as it looks. And that is a real shame, because on GranTurismo, not just on GT6, but on all of GranTurismo as a series, we've never had access to that many homologation cars. Now, for those who are unfamiliar with the term, basically, as I said earlier, homologation cars have to be produced to allow a manufacturer to race. That's not a requirement anymore for the Le Mans, but in the 90s that was the era where you would see loads and loads of these ultra-exclusive, hyper-exotic Le Mans going road cars, and it actually produced some of the coolest supercars ever made. The Mercedes CLK GT-R, the Porsche 911 GT1, even the Lotus Elise GT1, which was featured on GranTurismo 2. This car, though, is decidedly more restrained than many of those. The CLK GT-R, the Lotus, the Porsche and various others are all looking at roughly like 500-600 horsepower, in some cases even more. This Skyline doesn't have anywhere near that. In fact, it's not that much more powerful than a normal Skyline. And when fully tuned, as I mentioned, it's actually less powerful. Quite a lot less powerful. The premium R33 puts out 909 horsepower, and even the non-premium versions are pretty close to that. This car, though, puts out just under 800 fully tuned. It's actually 794. So, although that's certainly not a bad amount of power to be working with, and with a Skyline you'd assume that would make it rapid, to say the least, it is a shame that that's the most it's allowed to have. Now, you're also looking at a huge amount of torque, 750 foot-pounds, and the fact that it is rear-wheel drive instead of all-wheel drive does help with weight. But not as much as you'd think. it still weighs 1,264 kilos with the weight loss package, so it's actually not as impressive in that regard as you'd hope. The horsepower per tonne is 628, which is pretty good, that's super sports territory. But overall, it just begins to very quickly seem that this car may turn out to be a little underwhelming compared to the road car. And that's a shame, because it actually does turn out to be underwhelming. And although around a track it's not a bad car by any means, it is a bit heavier and kind of clumsier than you'd hope a Skyline would be, especially given how good the normal Skylines of this generation already are. But I would say the most disappointing aspect of this car's performance is actually in a straight line. Because this is one of those vehicles, like also another Nismo, the 400R, that you have to tune in a very specific way to unlock its full potential. There are some other vehicles as well like that, such as the Plymouth Cuda, and it certainly doesn't make the car awful to work with, it just means that you have to spend a little more time than you would with other vehicles to get that kind of performance. Now when you do unlock that performance, the top speed on this car isn't that bad. It does have, of course, more downforce than the road-going Skylines, and so, as you would assume, the top speed is slower. But it's a lot slower. You're looking at more like 235, 240-ish miles per hour out of this car, which isn't bad, but based on GranTurismo's physics, the performance that we've come to expect from certain cars, that's not really the kind of speed that you'd assume an 800 horsepower Skyline would have. Plus, you also lose the all-wheel drive advantage off the line because it's a rear-wheel drive car. So for $500,000 credits, this definitely isn't a vehicle which I would say you have to purchase. This isn't an essential vehicle, but it is nice as a collector's piece. It's ultra rare, ultra exotic, it's one of the ultimate Skylines as far as collector's pieces go, and although it does have some use, just don't set your expectations too high for it. But that's it overall for this particular pick. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.